Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion. Man, we're going to have a great conversation today because I actually found a brother from another mother. Donald Thompson's on the show with me today. And for Donald Thompson, the odds were against him becoming a CEO, and he beat them handsomely. Thompson, the son of teen parents from a small town in Louisiana, Bogalusa to be specific, watched his parents work tirelessly in the 1970s America to give him a better life. Their example served him well, and he became a successful CEO, angel investor, DEI expert, and tech entrepreneur before his 40th birthday. Thompson's career took a number of different paths, from selling Jolly Ranchers out of his school locker to working the graveyard shift in a warehouse and hawking subprime mortgages before he found success. Today, as a business mentor, advisor, and CEO of the diversity movement, Thompson teaches corporate executives and aspiring entrepreneurs the tools to accelerate their success while remembering exactly where they came from. He is a champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and actively raises awareness and commitment to DEI causes. As a 3-time Inc. 5000 CEO, he is one of the best in the world at taking an idea to commercial viability to million-dollar businesses with a particular superpower of recruiting and retaining top talent. In addition, Donald serves on several boards, is a member for Black Founders Google for Entrepreneurs Exchange, and the author of the new book, Underestimated, where he shares the story of a Black man who faced down the challenges inherent in contemporary America, fighting to find his place and fulfill his dreams. Donald and his wife, Jackie, currently live in Apex, North Carolina, and have 4 grown children, Mariah, Sierra, David, and Diana. David Thompson, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I'm ready.
Man, okay. So I really was, engaged and enthralled in reading Underestimated. And for me, it kind of, as you say, harkened back to yesteryear. Even for me, that's why I say, a brother from another mother is, you were talking about growing up, you were talking about Matchbox cars, you were talking about, said the Jolly Ranchers, even when you went through, you were a finance major, I was a finance major. The Amway scenario, it was presented to me, you accepted it, I did not. Talking about dreams and aspirations of playing, sport at a highly competitive level. I went the baseball path. For you, that ended, and you share that story, but you went on to play, at ECU. My daughter goes to ECU, and I'm like, there's a lot of parallels here.
That's awesome.
And so for me, it kept me engaged in reading. I'm like, wow. The whole values that you were talking about that were instilled also too at that time of being raised, it was colorless. It really was. And I appreciated that. So I wanted to thank you for that.
And
then the interesting part too is you're while you were talking about your parents, you ended up really growing up in Connecticut because your dad was a college football player and then became a college coach. And it was really interesting to see how that path actually went. I actually grew up in white minority.
Okay.
So I grew up in a place, a geographic region that was between Chicago and Gary, Indiana. And it was actually known as the industrial capital of the world. Well, we know what happened to industry, in the 70s and 80s in our country. And when I was in elementary school, most kids looked like me. And then as I moved up to high school, very few kids looked like me. Matter of fact, it was 10% white, and the rest was a mix of, African American and Latino and all of that. So again, parallels, but from a different color and perspective. And I start thinking about the values of the people who are currently in the workplace and the issues that we have in regards to diversity and equity and inclusion. And I'm like, I think it's a different ball game, isn't it?
I would agree with you. I think a lot of times we adopt macro narratives that sometimes take us off track to what we're trying to accomplish, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion is how do you create a better workplace? How do you create more innovation, more productivity? It is not the same as a social justice conversation. And so when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, what is very important to keep business leaders and teams engaged is how does it connect to the mission, values, and strategy of the organization? If it connects tightly, better retention. If it connects tightly, better innovation for our products. If it connects tightly, a better integration for our brand story, then DEI will get momentum and have staying power.
All right. So before we started recording, you and I were talking about the financial impacts to an organization of being more diverse. I mean, you cannot fight against it. It's irrefutable evidence. Organizations that have more diverse perspectives within them and do a good job, of course, of organizing and nurturing that. They financially outperform organizations that don't. Well, we know that. So maybe it doesn't take that long to convince executives, in order to be able to, really look at a transformation or really look at development. But I think a massive problem exists when you start talking about how that gets filtered all the way down to the front line. Well, I think overcome that issue.
Yeah, one of the things is we're trying to teach a transformation in the new business economy with old, outdated tools. We're trying to have traditional training, right? DEI pep rallies, if you will, right? Where people get excited about an idea, but there's no game plan of how to follow it through in the flow of how you work. So one of the things that we thought about, quite frankly, is if I have a challenge with how to add a spark plug to a lawnmower, I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm going to get a 5-minute video that's going to help me solve that problem right then. It's very niche, it's very specific, and it allows me to action orient right 10 minutes later. So we've created the diversity movement over 500 2 to 3 minute video vignettes about specific DEI topics because we understand the attention span. We understand the mobile first society. So we have to change the way we deliver DEI content such that it's not beating someone over the head with all these different acronyms, LGBTQIA+, right? What is microaggressions, all these things all at once. But when you need to give feedback as a leader, how do you give feedback to your team in an inclusive way? How do you alter your language so that you can bring people to you, not push people against? So it's these things that we can teach people to do that makes their work better, that creates more profit that people will align to and actually create momentum for the project. Well, DEI really is leadership development, leadership impact. And sometimes we make it seem like it's all about race, sexual orientation, gender, when really it's about how do you win in the marketplace. For those of your listeners that are golfers, right? You shouldn't use your driver on the putting green. So you have to think about the diversity of clubs in your golf bag and what's the right club at the right time, at the right tempo, at the right swing speed. Well, if you're going to innovate a product in a technology company and you only have a homogeneous team, your product's not going to be as good.
Yeah, again, well said. But okay, so let's talk about a lot of what we're, as I had mentioned, you and I share similar values, similar perspectives. We're talking about, the workforce being, quite different. And a lot of this is a self-awareness, a self-assessment, and it's very scenario-based. And so I'm actually an advisor of a mobile learning device company that it specializes in doing scenario-based learning. So here's the thing. A lot of people think they know. And that's the problem. They have a false sense of validity, validation, whatever. I mean, we only have so much in our well to be able to draw upon. And so you and I have a very similar well in regards to how we were brought up. Now you have something that I don't have, being, although it's kind of interesting. So in the book, you talk about you being called Blackie. Well, I was called Honky. And then when I moved down south, I was called a cracker. I'm like, okay, what the hell? That stuff. It's like, okay, well, part of that is just kids and growing up and how all that happens. But, we also are now seeing that happen in social media.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, I can hide at a distance, and I can call you all those things, and I can do this, that, and the other. And you know what? I'm not going to get hurt. That's not true. Also too, what it does, it affects your, perception and your decision making and your behavior. And so when we start talking about leadership and leading, a lot of it is behavior, and it's actually, manifested and resourced and fed from our well. So doing the scenario-based learning and helping people along the way to say, okay, you thought that was correct, has made a huge impact as well. So how do you actually, and leadership and all that development and all that is a journey.
Mm-hmm.
It absolutely is. So how are you addressing the fact that, okay, this is a long-term, really contract is really what it is that you're getting into in order to have a change in the regards to your outcome. How do you address that issue?
So if you think about any kind of change for us as individuals or as a corporation, an organization, a team, momentum is critical. So I actually encourage organizations and leaders and individuals to start small and develop momentum and speed over time, because small wins create confidence. And to your point, how do you react in the scenarios that are most prevalent in your job function? So you mentioned frontline professionals, right? So that means, how do we help our frontline professionals, if we're in a financial institution, greet more diverse clients? That is a specific instance of how diversity, equity, inclusion applies to their role in their job, right? So that means if we are a speaker, instead of saying, you guys, can we change our language to everyone? Hello, team. Because as leaders, we have an impact in the words that we use. If we're in the software or technology business, instead of saying man hours in terms of how long it's going to take to build your next iteration of technology, say person hours. If we are going to have a meeting and someone has a neurodiverse group of employees, right, that learn differently, they still can do the job, then if you send out the agenda a day or two in advance with better read aheads, you're going to get more inclusion because we all learn differently. If you're a leader in a meeting and you have introverts and extroverts, and you make sure that John, who's quiet, you say, John, do you have something to add before we move to the next topic? Now, all of a sudden, DEI lives in how we create a better workplace, not how we use jargon to intimidate one another. Right? And that's what happens a lot of times. And so what we're very cognizant of, to answer your question, and I gave some examples, is how do we make diversity, equity, inclusion a part of how we lead, work, and collaborate in the real world scenarios that we all live in?
I had, talking about a wise sage, and I've shared this story for those who are frequent listeners before. I was sitting on the finance board for my church. And we were talking about, teaching people how to tithe, teaching people how to, really, continue to grow the kingdom. And all of those things associated with, why, we need to have people, do what they do in regards to give back. Right. And it takes a long time to, for people to, come to that conclusion and do that. And typically it's later in life. They don't do that. So we need to teach our youngins how to do all that stuff. And we had one of the people on the finance board who was an older gentleman. And so I started asking him questions about, his tithing strategy and why he did it. And he goes, well, I don't talk about that. That's personal. And I said, well, let me ask you this. I said, if you're sitting there and you're expecting, people, everybody, to tithe and support the church and the church's mission and grow the kingdom. I said, if you don't share your story, how do you think people are actually going to be influenced to actually create their own? He just stared at me like a deer in the headlight.
I think your broader point is so impactful in that we all learn and are inspired by different examples of what we need to do. And so when we share our collective stories, we create the environment for someone to say, I can do that. that makes sense. I understand that individual's perspective, and I can create that action in a positive way like they did. And so really sharing our story creates a little risk, right? Because we have to open up with some things that we're doing and that we've learned. But two things: share your story, but also share the stage. So when you have the opportunity as a leader, you want to use examples of others where you can amplify those accomplishments of others. And leaders have the opportunity to share their story and to share the stage. And so I highly agree with what you shared in that moment.
So if I start thinking about the statistics associated with, leading and leadership development, Development Dimensions International, DDI, they do a lot of statistical analysis and studies in regards to leaders within organizations. And they really do a good job, I think, on frontline leadership analysis. And they talk about people who move into a leader role. How are they developed and when are they developed? Mm-hmm. And on average, people who are, say, frontline contributors and move into a leader role that now has to, develop and lead and manage, and there are two different things, and we're going to talk about that in a second, is, they don't get any type of development until they've been in the role for like 6 years on average. I mean, to me, I think that's one of our biggest problems. We also have what I call the fallacy of Reagan economics in regards to leadership development, is that we think if we spend all this money at the very top at the executive level, that's going to trickle all the way down to the front line. Like, that's crap. That is not going to happen. So, okay, so you're willing to spend $20,000 per executive, but you won't spend $200 for a frontline supervisor. I'm like, how dumb is that?
It is high quality dumb. And but we tend to fall into business habits and don't really remember why. See, if you explain the business value and impact of educating your people managers at all levels, the executives will get it. Right? But because we think in terms of command and control, you think to make sure you educate the top, right? And so it's really about, and I'm just really extending what you described, it's really about thinking holistically about how the organization actually grows. The executive team sets strategy, direction, and what behaviors are tolerated and encouraged in the organization. The people managers, those in that frozen middle that are struggling with all this new stuff, are the ones that have to execute. And so it's very important that you have the same level of Deloitte consulting strategy at the top, but where's that strategy for how to create that information, action, and feedback loop from those that are working with the frontline professionals, that people manager in day to day? And that's where your scalability for growth lives. And that's whether it's DEI, that's whether it's introducing a new product, that's whether changing a software that the company has to use. It's that middle leader that's touching the top and the frontline workers that we really have to pay more attention to when you're thinking about business transformation of any type.
That's very true. And it's also too, like you're saying, and I'd be interesting to see what your thoughts are on this, because this is what I find. So I actually do have an online leadership academy for frontline supervisors in customer service and contact center environments called Call Center Coach. And at Call Center Coach, we have a journey, a path that's multimodal. There's videos, there's live, there's all kinds of different things because of what you were saying. People learn differently, all of that. Also, you talk about the in moment within the workday. What do I do? We also talk about creating a community, because here's the interesting thing about adult learning is that, as much as 60 to 70% of the things that we learn actually come from our peers, not from sitting down. And so therefore there's risk with that as well. And so there's also things associated with what are they actually learning in that circle, right? But we have to be very mindful of that. And look at that in regards to what we call learning quality. And that's also what DDI calls, learning quality is, I could spend $50 on a training session. Well, what's the return on that? Right. So if I talk about, again, at the front line component and getting into that, first leader level, what I often find is that we have people who are above them, who are reporting to them. They're not even investing in their own development. So I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So you're okay. You can't point the finger and say, well, that's something that they need to do without, like they say, those three fingers pointing back at you saying, maybe me first.
I really appreciate that statement about the adult learning, and 60% comes from our peers, right? I knew that, but I didn't have the data, but you provided the data behind a thought, right, that I had. Here's what's really important. We have to make sure that we have the data behind why the executives need to change, because most business leaders are data driven. They're not emotive, right? It's not that they don't have empathy and all those things, but their President's Club, their bonuses, the way they're compensated and grow their brand is based on the data they deliver for the organization. And so we have to layer diversity, equity, inclusion, leadership development with those insights in short bursts, right? They don't need a 16-page white paper, right? They need a fact sheet of why they should do something different. So I appreciate that, number one. The second piece in terms of that leadership quality is a lot of times people don't know how to buy educational content. And so therefore they don't know how to put it through its rigor like they would a software buy for a company, or what they would if they were hiring a new person, because usually when it's something new, they've never hired a chief diversity officer before. They've never bought DEI content before. So we talk to clients and say, listen, why are you trying to hire a chief diversity officer when you don't even know what you want to accomplish with DEI? They're like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But they were doing it because their peers were hiring a chief diversity officer. Back to your point. And so I had to tell a client, a multi-billion-dollar organization, you're not ready for that. Why don't we just start with having some listening sessions with your team to see what your team cares about? Let's just start there. And then as we go through that journey of listening and doing some research and just having some discussions, number one, that's cheaper. Number two, we don't have to pull back from a big mistake. And then what we found is that the team wasn't ready for that. What they needed most was to have better career planning, better mentorship within their organization. And that was the trigger to help people feel more belonging at the stage that company was in. And so back to your point of quality learning and that we're getting information from peers, we got to make sure that we're not following the leader because we're seeing everybody else do it, and it might not be right for our situation.
I think that goes back to the whole self-assessment and self-awareness piece, right? And when you're immersed within an organization, those things just aren't possible. And I think that's kind of the hard hump for a lot of people to get over is, and this isn't an arrogance thing. This is just like a human condition thing. I mean, I always jokingly say, I said, there's a reason why God made our eyes point outward in the front of our head, right? But that also means there's stuff going on back there that I can't see, right? So somebody else needs to look at that for me, right? How do I look in this? We've grown up, asking, how do I look, right, Mom? But, oftentimes when we get older, we think we're not supposed to do that because that's a sign of weakness. That's a sign. No, you always need to be saying, how do I look, Mom?
I think one of the things that I have a lot to work on as a leader still, but I've grown and I've matured over the years. But that construct of looking in the mirror, that humility that comes from looking inward first with what you need to do better, how you need to model differently, how you need to go on a personal journey. I'll give you a very powerful example and I'll do it briefly. But as we launched our DEI work with the diversity movement and different things, I was talking to Gary Salamita, who's the president and CEO of the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce. We both live in North Carolina. That is a very powerful organization within the state. And Gary and I had a cup of coffee and he said, listen, what are your thoughts, Don, about how we need to think about DEI and the work that we're doing? And I have some members that are scared to talk about it. Some members don't think it's important. Some think should be on top of our radar. I said, Gary, here's my advice. Let's just work on a personal journey with you. And why don't you take some of the education that we have? Your example is going to allow you to ask better questions. It's going to allow you to be more thoughtful. And one of the things that he did is he attended one of our intensives for 3 or 4 days to get his foundation as a leader better. And I highly encourage people that are listening, we all talk about what someone else should do. right? When was the last time you had a cup of coffee with someone that has a different background than you? Let's just do that. When was the last time you invited somebody different to your foursome, right? If one of your typical golf folks moves out or moves away, why don't you invite somebody from a different city, from a different industry, from a different church, and just play golf, a game you enjoy, but do it with someone different and just start there. My thing is, let's not try to change the world before we change some of our small circumstances right within our power. And that resonates with a lot of folks because they can go, I can do that. And once you say, I can do that, you're going to take action.
Yeah, that's the excellent point. And for me, it's like, I had the opportunity, talking about the whole sports and baseball thing. I became certified as a pitching coach. And so I actually coach at the varsity level at Ragdale High School. And I really enjoy it a lot. But as part of that, I started working with these kids and I found myself really dealing with the mental side of the game more than anything. So I actually became certified as a mental performance coach. And I found that more and more corporate organizations are starting to put in mental performance coaching as part of their leadership development, because it's like, the reality is for all of us, and we need to face this and get our grips on this. We live in what is something that was coined many years ago called VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we live in a VUCA world now. It's a VUCA world. Okay, we don't know what's going to come, alongside of us and knock us over. COVID, who saw that coming, right? So it's like, okay, so we live in a VUCA world. That's not changing. So therefore, how do I manage within a VUCA world? And part of it is with what you're talking about is that I have to become more self-aware and I have to invest in me. And so through my mental performance coaching process, I came across a guy named Grant Sorensen who talks about what's your 1424. And he's like, okay, well, first of all, let's explain what 1424 is. And I really love this, is that, we always talk about getting 1% better. It's a journey, it's a path. And if we do it with others, it's an adventure. That's the difference between a journey and an adventure. When we do it with others, it's an adventure. Is that if you look at 1% of your day, it's 14 minutes and 24 seconds. Mm-hmm. If you want to get 1% better every day, what's your 1424?
That's awesome. Like I'm having a good time. Like just to throw that out there. And if you see me on the video, like putting down, it's because I've got a page and a half of notes just on what we're talking about. Because I'm a competitive learner and I feel like this, and I'll give my feedback on that point, is that we're always talking to people that we could gain more from if we're really active listening. Right. And I really tried that to me about 5 years ago became my 1424. Because I saw myself coming in contact with business leaders, entrepreneurs, advisors, coaches like yourself, but was I gaining everything I could from each of those interactions? And so here's what I did. And I'm super excited about this. And this is a great cheat code for your audience. When I would have a 30-minute meeting with the leader, I would ask them humbly is if we can finish our business in 25 minutes, can I take the last 5 minutes and ask you a leadership related question? No one ever turned me down. If we can finish our business in 25 minutes, right? So I'm not asking them for more time. Got 30 minutes on their precious calendar. I'm busy, you're busy. But can I get 5 minutes and really just ask you some things that you're learning, that you've worked on, that you've overcome? And so over the course of the last 5 years, I've had some tremendous 5-minute nugget MBA leadership, PhD level leadership discussions with some phenomenal leaders. And that is how I raised my 1% leadership learning capacity in the same amount of time that I have, right, in doing that. So I love that 1424 and I appreciate it. I mean, this is great.
Well, yeah, I mean, and to me, it's kind of like what you were talking. I love that competitive learner. I'm like, okay, I can, again, brother from another mother.
That's right.
It's like, I mean, that's the same thing for me. And I even have to I've gotten to the point where I have to preface to people. I'm like, okay, before I tell you this, just let you know, I'm freaking geeking out on some of this. Okay.
Continue because I'm into it.
And then so, because otherwise it's like, where in the heck's he coming from? And why is he telling me this? And I'm like, this made an impact for me. It made a difference and it'll last. And I always say that, if there comes a day where there is a day that I don't learn anything, it should be the same day I take my last breath. They should coincide, right? It's just the way that it is. Okay. So, and you talk about also that education, me doing these podcasts and interviewing awesome people with awesome stories, like yourself is, I can't pay for this type of education, right? There's just no way possible. So it's, and I get to share it. It's like, that's like a double benefit, and it just continues to grow. So I appreciate that. Also too, it's kind of interesting. You talk about that 5-minute nugget. We're going to do something like that with Hoedown here in a few minutes.
All right.
Before we do that, what I want to know is, okay, so you got the book, you talk about giving back, you talk about the work that you're doing now. You had interesting stories about owning some professional teams, at Arena Football League. You had a regular football, team in India, and you talk about all the, it's like, I love your exploration and your continuous quest, to try to look at that, what with that 1424, how do we get better, and how, and you're in doing all that. But I'm starting to think, it's like, well, where does he go from here? So what is that, when I think about Don Thompson and a goal, and I think about the kids and the family and grandkids yet to be, can you share one of your goals would be from where you are now?
So one of the things that I'm in the process, and I have some really cool examples of, but I really enjoy the opportunity of uplifting, promoting, and working with women leaders, and in particular, women leaders of color. And when I transitioned to opening and starting the diversity movement, I was the CEO of Walk West, a digital marketing firm, Inc. 5000 marketing firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I'm pleased to say that Abba Bowers is now the CEO and doing better than I ever could. And when I look at the executive team at the diversity movement, it is really a woman-led business. Like, I'm the co-founder and different things, but we really been intentional about creating some opportunities in our interview process, our recruiting process, to really focus on some folks that may not have had those same opportunities, but have more than enough talent to be impactful. So that's number one. The second thing that I would say in terms of future orientation is I have about 5 right now, but I really enjoy and can be helpful as an executive coach, counselor. And the reason is because I've made a lot of mistakes and I have a very varied background. I've been in technology sales. I've been on the marketing side, right? I've been in retail. I've been in DEI. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an angel investor. So now I have these practical experiences that can help executives real time challenge some of their norms in the way they're thinking about building and growing business. And that's something I enjoy doing for a couple of reasons. Number one, the folks that I work with are really intentional about learning and change, right? And I tell folks, I'm not a traditional 360-degree feedback, different things, disc learning, all that stuff's fine, right? But the folks that I work with, and as I build that next phase of what I want to do a year, 2, 3 years from now, it's about really attacking the problems of the moment. And how do we get some real world items of things you're struggling with that you don't feel like you can talk about out loud because you have that executive facade that you have all the answers. And that's where this, and I know that leaders really struggle. It's really lonely for us. And to find some folks you can really talk to is super important. So anyway, thank you for that space. But that's something that I'm evolving to and putting my own spin on how to do some executive guidance and coaching, if you will.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Okay, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Don, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us all move onward and upward faster. Don Thompson, are you ready to Hoedown?
I'm ready to Hoedown.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
One of the things that's holding you back from being a better leader today is your ability to learn and assess and then apply new learning quickly.
And what is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Use what you have today to get what you want. Don't worry about the things you don't have, the assets, the money. Whatever capabilities you have today, that's where you start.
And what do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
I realize and learn from my mistakes, but I don't let my current mistakes or current lack keep me from dreaming big. My current situation is not my future state.
And what would be one book you could recommend to our Legion? And it could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to Underestimated on our show notes page as well.
Book I'm reading now by Chip and Dan Heath, The Power of Moments. And I think that it's very, very important when we're thinking about big picture, that we think about the now, the present, and take advantage of those critical moments of learning, of teaching, or of innovation.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net and doing a search for Don or Donald Thompson. Okay, Don, this is my last Hump Day Hold On question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
That my network is my net worth. I would be more intentional about the follow-up and follow-through on amazing people that I meet, and be more intentional about asking and more confident for people to open doors for me. Most leaders are willing to be helpful. I learned that later in life. At 25, I would have been more intentional at knowing my network is my net worth.
Don, I had a blast chatting with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
DonaldThompson.com. LinkedIn is phenomenal. If you reach out, I'll reach back.
Donald Thompson, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all get over the hump.
Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.